What is a multiverse? How does it work? And why does it matter? More importantly, what does it mean for the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Based on what we've seen so far and what's coming, here's our best shot at explaining the MCU multiverse. Listen carefully to the conversation between the Ancient One and Bruce Banner in Avengers Endgame, and it tells you just about everything you need to know about how the MCU multiverse works. The Ancient One doesn't want to give Banner the Time Stone, because she fears doing so will create an alternate timeline. There would then be a timeline in which the Time Stone left her care during the Battle of New York, and so would never be in Kamartaj for Stephen Strange to use in Doctor Strange. There would also still be yet another timeline, where the Time Stone never left her care, and events unfolded as we already know them. Simply put, you can't change the past. If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future. And your former present becomes the past, which can now be changed by your new future. If you try to change the past, you create a paradox. For example, if you go back in time and stop your parents from ever meeting, then how do you exist? And if you don't exist, how do you go back in time to stop your parents from meeting? You can't go on like that forever. The universe solves this paradox by creating an alternate timeline, something the Avengers have to deal with as part of their journey to collect the Infinity Stones. During the lead up to 2019, Spider-Man Far From Home, there was a lot of conversation about whether the film confirmed the existence of an MCU multiverse. In the trailer, we learned that Quentin Beck claims to be from an alternate universe where his world was destroyed. He was supposedly in the Prime MCU timeline doing what he could to stop the same thing from happening. Of course, it turns out Quentin Beck was lying about almost everything. He wasn't from another universe, and neither were the elemental creatures he was fighting. In fact, the elementals weren't even the elementals, they were mysterious illusions created by a swarm of drones and holograms. But it's important to remember that the fact that Mysterio wound up not being from another universe doesn't disprove the existence of the MCU multiverse. From his earliest comic book appearances, Mysterio set himself up as a supervillainous con man and liar, but that doesn't mean he's wrong. In fact, Mysterio himself has already had some real multiverse adventures in the pages of Marvel Comics. The weirdest part of the back and forth about whether Mysterio's cover story confirmed the existence of an MCU multiverse was the fact that the conversation was going on at all. 3 years before Far From Home's release, the MCU multiverse was confirmed without Quentin Beck's help. In 2016, Doctor Strange, the Ancient One, confirms the existence of a multiverse within the MCU when she says Stephen Strange on his memorable trip through that multiverse. As the bedraggled Strange floats through the cosmos, the Ancient One provides a narration for his trippy journey. Among other things, she tells Strange an infinite number of worlds without, and so there you have it. Regardless of the home address of Quentin Beck, the MCU has a multiverse, and its existence was confirmed long before Far From Home. Though it's understandable why this was forgotten or ignored. Far From Home was preceded by Endgame, the first MCU film to really have anything significant to do with time travel and alternate timelines. That's probably why it was closer to the forefront of everyone's minds than it might have been while watching Doctor Strange in 2016. Steve Rogers' decision to remain in the past at the end of Avengers Endgame is a perfect example of how the MCU multiverse works. When asked about Cap's final fate, Endgame co-director Joe Russo confirmed that when he stays in the past and marries Peggy Carter, the life Steve lives occurs in an alternate timeline. Then at some point, Steve somehow returns to the Prime MCU timeline to give his shield to Sam Wilson. One of the big questions on fans' minds is, if Cap really did accomplish his mission, Steve's job was to return all the stones at the exact moments they were taken from the various times, thereby stopping alternate timelines from being created. But first of all, we never see Steve's quest. So we don't know if things worked as planned. Second, there's a question of whether Banner's theory around bringing the stones back is sound in the first place. Banner tells the Ancient One that bringing the stones back to the precise moments when they're taken and returning them will stop the timelines from splitting. But would it, or is it possible it would make things worse? For example, Banner takes the time stone. As soon as he takes the stone, an alternate timeline has been created. Would bringing the stone back erase the second timeline, or would it create a third? This is why we can only hope time machines remain in the realm fiction travel. Somewhere out there, in the multiverse, Loki is alive. And the reason he's alive is not only what allows for his upcoming Disney Plus miniseries, but it also possibly complicates things with MCU's multiverse even more. An endgame, Loki gets his hands on the Tesseract while Thor is trying to resuscitate Tony Stark. Once he does disappears in a blue cloud, a new timeline has been created, one in which Loki was never brought to Asgard to face Odin's justice after the Battle of New York. Presumably we'll be finding out what happens to that Loki in his upcoming miniseries. Whether Banner's theory on how to end split or the timeline is correct. When it comes to this specific alternate timeline, it doesn't matter. Remember, Loki is escaped prevents Steve and Tony from getting the Tesseract, forcing them to go back to the 70s and get it from S.H.I.E.L.D. When Cap goes back in time to return the stones at the end of Endgame, he only has one Tesseract to return. Presumably he's going to return it to the 70s, but that means everything that happens in Stark Tower in 2012 all still happened. That timeline still exists, and it's going to be a Loki playground. There's one more alternate timeline that couldn't have been erased by Cap's journey to the past, the timeline in which the 2014 Thanos and his horses jump forward to 2023 and assault Avengers compound with Thanos captures Nebula. From 2023 they reverse engineer her Pym Particles and replaced her with 2014 Nebula. What does that all mean? There now exists a timeline in the MCU where Thanos and all his forces disappear in 2014, never to return. As soon as the respective interstellar empire of that timeline realize he's gone, they'll probably have one huge multi-planet party that lasts a few decades. Returning the Soul Stone to Vormir can't alter Thanos' disappearance, it can only create more divergent timelines. In a way you could argue Tony Stark does double duty when he snaps away the Mad Titan at the end of Endgame. He wipes out panels from not just one, but two universes. We don't know a lot yet about 2021's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but just from the name, it seems likely we're going to be learning more about the MCU's multiverse in the Doctor Strange sequel. If any hero is equipped to explore the multiverse, it's Doctor Strange. His first film introduces the multiverse, and it's that multiverse that Strange uses the Time Stone to explore in 2018 Avengers Infinity War. It's possible the events of Endgame are the key to whatever is going wrong in the upcoming sequel. Endgame is the only time we've seen any kind of significant time travel in the MCU. The very phrase multiverse of madness suggests something has gone wrong with the multiverse. And if that's the case, then all the time hopping the heroes and villains of Endgame did could be the reason. Another big hint is the upcoming Disney Plus miniseries WandaVision. We don't know much more about the series than we do about the Doctor Strange sequel. But what we do know is intriguing. Star Elizabeth Olsen has said, at least part of the series will have a 1950s setting, which hints pretty strongly at a multiverse connection. At the same time, we heard about stories like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We learned we were going to be meeting the mighty Thor, aka Jane Foster, in the fourth entry of the Thor franchise, Thor: Love and Thunder. What does this have to do with the multiverse? Well, all the time hopping and Endgame may give us the most obvious answer to the question of how Jen gets almighty. Steve Rogers has Mjolnir with him when he goes back in time at the end of Endgame, but it isn't with him when he returns as an elderly man. Presumably Steve would have returned the hammer to Asgard circa 2013 when he returned the ether. If so, then that might be the answer. For the sake of argument, assume that when Steve arrives in 2013 Asgard, he doesn't grab the first Asgardian he sees and say, "Hey, I'm a time traveler. Can you tell me where Thor is?" Assume Cap simply leaves the hammer somewhere, knowing it will go to Thor as soon as the Thunder God summons it, and then continues on his journey. Then assume Jane Foster comes upon the hammer, wherever Steve happens to leave it. Out of curiosity, if you found yourself alone with the hammer of Thor, wouldn't you give it a shot? One possibility that's loomed since before Disney's acquisition of Fox is that Marvel characters whose film rights are still held by other studios might be narratively connected to the MCU through the multiverse. When rumors swirled that Venom might be showing up in Spider-Man Far From Home, the multiverse was an explanation some fans clung to. Spider-Verse versions of Spider-Man in other media were considered to be alternate universe Spider-Man, the Spider-Man from the ad Spider-Man, and his Amazing Friends cartoon, from the newspaper strip, and even from old Hostess ads Marvel's comics used to carry were all considered genuine Spider-Man from other universes. Fantasy brutally murders Loki in the opening scene of 2018 Avengers Infinity War, and later in the same film, he hurls his adoptive daughter Gamora to her death on Vormir. Yet both Loki and Gamora show up in the 2019 follow-up Avengers Endgame, and we'll be seeing both of them again. Loki will enjoy his own solo miniseries on Disney+, while Gamora will almost definitely be back for the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Both characters survive as part of alternate realities. Even if Captain America returned all the Infinity Stones exactly where they were meant to be. Loki is escape in New York City and Thanos. His journey to the future each creates splintered timelines that can't be undone by Steve Rogers. The MCU multiverse provides a resurrection easy button for Marvel Studios storytellers want to bring back Odin, the Warriors 3 and all the others Guardians, they must exist in an alternate timeline, want to reunite Wanda Maximoff with their speedster brother, who dies in Age of Ultron, there must be a timeline where old Tron didn't kill him. That doesn't just go for the good guys either. With the multiverse more prominent in the MCU his narrative, we could see the return of any villain